Hey, hey, hi, hi, ho, ho. Harry here from the nations. And it is the kickoff lecture for MSP Tech Talk Fall Quarters. As you know, if you're new to us, first of all, I'm the founder of SMB Nation. Thank you for joining us. And if you're not aware, we have an academic lecture series now entering its third year. We'll be back next year where we bring you topics of interest, and of course, we're supported by well-behaved and well-trained community sponsors. My favorite analogy is public radio, where we're telling long format stories, generously underwritten by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation by analogy. In fact, today we're supported by FORTINET, leading the conversation in security, and how appropriate, because today's topic is DNS filtering. We have a lot to cover, and we're with well-known and well-respected analyst Frank Olhurst out of the New York City area. So Frank, welcome home from Amsterdam, and I'm glad we got on your schedule before you get busy with a couple of more events between now and the end of the year. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Harry. It's a pleasure to join you and do this presentation.
All right. Well, thanks. Well, Frank, you've got the talking stick. So let's move on to slide number 2, and maybe go ahead and introduce yourself for those of the audience that don't know your background and test labs and that kind of thing.
All right. I'm Frank Olhurst, as the name says there. I'm a IT journalist that has worked across some of the major publications, and I'm also an analyst, and I'm also a solution provider. I started out as a journalist over in '99 over at CRN, and I was the test center director and the CTO of the channel group. And I've also worked for eWeek. I launched a publication called Channel Insider when I was over at Ziff Davis under eWeek. I've done quite a bit of freelance work. I do a lot of white papers. I do a lot of research. I'm a thought leader for Madison Logic, and I've been heavily involved in the channel for years, both as a journalist and a person operating a business. And
Yep.
as Harry can attest to that, we've known each other for a very long time and collaborated on numerous things going back to our small business server days.
Yes, sir. I trade it all to go back to that. Well, Frank, we're here to talk about DNS filtering, and I got to admit, I am a student today, so I appreciate you being here to educate me. I don't know as much as I should. Let's jump into it.
Sure thing. Let's see how much we can confuse you, Harry. So, we're going to kind of start off with some of the basics here. We hear the term DNS filtering, domain name service filtering. Now, if you think about how the internet works, everything works via domain names. In other words, the IP addresses on the servers out there, and for the websites get associated with a domain name, which is registered with a domain registry. And the idea here is that you can use these simple names like, smbnation.com instead of having to type in Harry's IP address to get to his website. So domain names are associated with websites, basically. Now, the whole concept behind DNS filtering is to give some control over how you access those domains. Now, the way that DNS filtering works, it works as part of your router at the edge, or your software-defined networking, or your SD-WAN, or some of your edge connectivity capabilities. For example, our sponsor FORTINET offers firewalls and security appliances and things that live at the edge of the network. So the way that DNS filtering works is that, it kind of lives in that device at the edge of the network, and it is
Mm-hmm.
able to block access to certain sites for a specific reason. While that might sound a little bit generic, that is really the simplest way to describe it. So what happens is that an end user will type in, let's say www.microsoft.com, and they'll type that in, and that request will go out, and the domain name servers out there will, return the proper way via IP to connect to that site. What domain name service filtering does is that it allows you to either connect or not connect to that site based upon certain criteria. So with DNS filtering, you set up policies to block access to a domain. Now, this is a lot like web filtering in one respect, and we'll get into that later with a better description of what the differences are and what the advantages that DNS filtering offers over web filtering or content filtering. But the idea here is that you can define these policies or rule sets that can block access to domains. Now, natively, DNS filtering solutions usually have a database that's stored within the router at the edge of the network, which is constantly updated with known bad domains. And in other words, those botnets or those seized domains. So right off the bat, it's going to prevent access to those sites, which in turn protects the end user and the end user's network. You can go one step further than that, is that these databases that the domain name system filters have in them also categorize domains. So, you can have domains that fall under like an adult content category, or under a firearms category, or under a hacking category. And you can then set policies and rules that can say that, all right, if this domain name falls within one of those categories, block access to it. What's more, domain name system filtering can also record and report on access to the web. And this becomes a very powerful capability where you're able to track access to domains to be able to build reports around it, to understand how the web is being used in a business. Any questions on that, Harry?
I was just humming and hawing, but folks, be sure to use, actually a good question you've asked, because folks, be sure to use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar control panel. Frank, it looks like we have a question. Let me read it. We have David Bribner who's asking, does DOH make DNS filtering less effective, and how to consider that? Does DOH make DNS filtering less effective, and how to consider that?
In some respects, it can make it less effective, but it all comes down to how you're going to configure your DNS system, your DNS filtering system. So ultimately, your configuration will dictate how your DNS filtering works. And depending upon, the device or service that you're using to do DNS filtering, you have a lot of options available to you that control, how things are filtered.
Okay.
All right. Do we have any other questions after that first slide there? Do you have anything you want to add there, Harry?
Let's see. Well, we have a quick question from Daryl Roberts. Excuse me. Daryl says, and this is a little bit longer question, bear with me. Since the filtering is done in the cloud instead of in a device on the local network, does it know which workstation user is making the request so we can take appropriate action? Or does it just know that the request came from the edge router? It's actually a good question.
That is a good question. It really depends upon the implementation of your DNS filtering. If you're using a security appliance at the edge of the network, it is going to know where that request is coming from, what IP address at what local IP address. So it is going to be able to track all of that. Now, if you're using a cloud-only based service, it will still be able to track it to an extent because it does know the destination. Even if it is going through, network address translation or, DHCP assigned addresses, you still have that MAC address involved that can be associated with a endpoint. So yes. Regardless of whether or not it's a cloud-based solution or a local appliance-based solution, you can garner the information to kind of track it back to the requester.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Let's move on.
You're welcome. So that's a good segue time, a point in time to go into how does DNS filtering actually work. So long story short, domain name system filtering is a technique for blocking access to websites based upon recorded domain information, policies, and rules. And by recorded domain information, that means the domain name filtering systems out there usually have access to the complete DNS infrastructure to be able to associate, who the domain owner is, if that domain remains valid, and who the registrar is. That helps to be able to determine, if a domain has been hijacked or if that domain has been usurped in some form, or if that domain has become associated with like a botnet or something like that. So it's important that the domain name service system filtering has that capability to be able to better understand domain information. What's more, you also have the idea of policies and rule sets. Policies can be defined to say that, all right, these particular domains are whitelisted, which means you can access them without any problem whatsoever, or they might be blacklisted, meaning that you could never access those domains. Some domains that might be blacklisted might be hate speech sites and things like that. You also have rules that can work with a set of categories so that you can check off these categories to say whether or not you want to allow people to access those sites. For example, you have a category for social media, so you could easily block access to things like Facebook. You have a category for peer-to-peer networking services, so you could block off that as well if you choose to do that in your business. The DNS filtering system validates the DNS queries and checks to make sure that those domains are not identified as malicious. That's an important element as well, because every day more malicious sites come into being. And so it's critical for your filtering system to understand that there's the potential for these malicious sites, and these malicious sites are being tracked. Now, when the DNS filtering comes into play, it blocks access to sites at the edge of the network. This means that for sites that aren't blocked, there's no latency added. The idea here is that, DNS filtering will not slow down your normal operations. The only time it comes into play is when there's a blocked or policy filtered site trying to be accessed. And then it'll come back instantly to say that you cannot access that site based upon the policy. And usually for most of the systems out there, it's a administrator defined message that can pop up on the user's browser to say that this site violates whatever policy, or this site is a known malware site, and so on and so forth. That comes in very handy for when people kind of click on those links that are embedded in emails, which can
Yeah.
bring them into, a site that might try and deliver malicious software. And that's how a lot of this spyware and ransomware and elements like that get into today's networks, is that somebody clicks on a link in an email. If you're blocking access, via DNS filtering to those sites, they're not going to get infected.
Hey, I have a question.
Sure.
Javier Gutierrez asks, what advantages do you see for either device-based DNS filtering versus cloud-based DNS filtering? Now that's almost a PhD thesis. So Frank, let's stay on the ranch, but either or advantages, device-based or cloud-based DNS filtering, please.
A lot of it has to do with your existing infrastructure. If you're an organization that is heavily leveraging the cloud and you're using a lot of cloud services and you're using a lot of software as a service offerings, you might be better off with a cloud-based solution, just because you might not have the capability on site to support an appliance. Another situation is that, let's say you have a large mobile workforce that doesn't connect back to a main office. They use all cloud-based applications to do their job. It makes sense to locate your DNS filtering in the cloud. Now, when you move back to the traditional kind of office setup where you'll have a small local area network and even if it's just a simple Wi-Fi network where you have shared connectivity via broadband or some other methodology to connect out into the internet, that's an ideal place for you to put a physical or virtual appliance and have it live right there so that all of your internal users are protected. And then if you have external users that have to come into the internal network, usually they'll come in via VPN or something like that, which means they'll also be protected because they'll be going out through the edge device to connect to the internet.
Okay. All right, my friend. And Javier has another question, but let's keep moving on. Well, hold on. This is related. It's a follow-up. Here it is. Based on that last answer, would it be recommended to have a combination of both when you have a large office with a considerable mobile workforce? So the question is both.
Well, if you have a large office, you're definitely going to need something at the edge of the network because you have to support those internal users. You're not going to want to force all of those users to go back out to the cloud to do DNS filtering and then make their connections that way. You'll add latency. Now, if you have a large mobile workforce, it really comes down to how you are connecting with that mobile workforce. If you have resources located in-house on site that mobile workforce has to connect to, they're usually going to be coming in via a VPN or some other connection technology, whether it's RDP, a VPN, a virtual host, or something like that, which means that appliance at the edge of the network will do the DNS filtering for them. Now, on the other hand, if you have this mobile workforce that they don't have to connect back to the office, that they're using all SaaS applications, let's say they're using M365 for all their basic office functionality, as a hosted offering, and they're using SAP for something, as a defined service, or Salesforce or these other types of software as a service, cloud-based offerings, then you're going to need something out in the cloud to better service them.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, my friend. Let's move on.
Okay, moving on. So, why would you want to use DNS filtering? You know, that's the question I'm asking you, Harry. Why would you want to use it? But I'll give you the answers. You know, DNS filtering can provide protection from online threats. And what I mean by that is that being as you're filtering out known bad actor sites, those online threats cannot penetrate your network. In other words, we'll go back to that example of, you know, kind of clicking on that link in an email. You know, if it goes to a malware site or a botnet or something like that, DNS filtering will block that. It won't allow that. Other use cases come down to when you're actually in the browser, and let's say you want to go visit a site, and it might be a site that's been compromised, that might have some sort of a embedded piece of code that could infect your network. The DNS filtering should help you avoid those. So, in other words, DNS filtering can prevent malware infections.
Mm-hmm.
It
Frank?
also validates that websites are safe because you've got these known good sites, these white-listed sites, and you've also got this database of sites that are known to be bad. This way you're validating that the websites that the end user is visiting is safe to access. So in that realm as well, it also gives you the concept of basic content filtering, being as you're able to block sites based upon categories. And a lot of the DNS filtering providers out there have as many as 40 different categories, which can include, you know, everything from, you know, political commentary sites to social media sites to VoIP services to file sharing sites to, you know, hate speech to weapons to, you know, anything that might be upsetting to a particular user or inappropriate. So you're able to filter access to those sites. And finally, you know, your DNS filtering, depending upon how you've deployed it, especially if you're using an appliance at the edge of the network, it can become part of the security stack, which means it can integrate with the other cybersecurity products, which means, you know, your traffic going through your, you know, UTM, your Universal Threat Management Appliance at the edge of the network, all of that traffic still goes through all of the regular security checks.
Yeah. Well, Frank, I think I can add value here, perhaps. So every day as a member of the media and SMB Nation, part of our business model is to report news and analysis and so on, folks. You know, on screen too, you have my permission to, you know, click over to smbnation.com and kind of see things we're posting up and coverage. So Frank, every morning, Jenny and I get these emails, and they're always from some name at gmail.com. And they are about, I looked over the SMB Nation website. Do you accept our author contributions? Here's a really good article on fitness technology today. Got one on fitness technology. Frank, it's a lot like the way you and I would get a daily barrage of emails from PR agencies, right, suggesting this is a really good story. And Jenny and I had to think about it. And on the surface, it's kind of like, well, wow, you know, maybe this one, you know, piece from somebody at gmail.com is kind of on target. It's free content for us. We could switch it up a little bit. But Frank, there's always a link back to a site. And so the attack vectors are getting very sophisticated. And the reason I emphasize these come from a @gmail.com address is there's typically no phone number that I could call and speak with the author. And then I'm kind of like, well, why are these all Gmail addresses? And, they want me to post up content on my credible, respected, authoritative site that links back to their site where maybe they're doing an embed or something, an injection. Frank, first of all, do you get those kind of emails? Carl Palachuk gets a lot of those, and I don't know if you get the same.
Yeah, I get tons of those emails. People, kind of pitching content, and there'll be an embedded link. If you want to read the story or get the PDF or whatever, click here. And there's a few times if you look at the link and what's actually displayed in the email, the link doesn't match. So
Right.
you kind of know it's a some type of a phishing attempt or some type of an attack in that respect, an attack vector. Now, where DNS filtering would come into play is that for, let's say, the neophyte person that wouldn't look at the origin of the link, they would click on that link anyway to try and get that content. And if it's a site that's a known bad actor, the DNS filtering will, prevent you from going to that site. So, it kind of saves you in that way. But of
Yeah.
course, it's only one part of your security stack.
Oh, yeah.
You should also have, other security mechanisms in place, but DNS filtering could be the quickest way to prevent the problem from happening.
Okay, thank you. And Alan Helbush out of the Bay Area is essentially saying, Harry, everybody gets those with a decent or better website. So Harry, sounds like talking to my son. Dad, everybody knows this.
Yeah.
All right, please continue, Frank. Oh, Frank, we're coming up on the bottom of the hour, but please continue. Frank, hang on. Folks, if you joined us a little bit late, we are talking about DNS filtering with analyst Frank Olhurst out of New York City. He's just back from Amsterdam, catching his breath. I know he'll be at the AWS conference after Thanksgiving down in Vegas. And Frank, we appreciate the voodoo you do. Be sure to use the questions feature to ask your questions or post up snarky remarks. Please continue, Frank.
Sure. Well, let's talk about what the real world advantages that DNS filtering offers, people today. DNS filtering is very easy to deploy and manage. That's because it's kind of usually built into that edge device, and it's no more complicated than either signing up for a license or setting up some sort of a proxy for a web service. So the idea is that you could turn it on very quickly. And management is usually, done through a centralized dashboard with a unified management console where you can easily get in there to, set up your categories and policies. And the DNS filtering solutions on the market today offer tons of predefined categories and sample policies. It's also very, very easy to build whitelists. Let's say that you have particular domains that you need to access on a regular basis, and maybe they're private domains or they're ones that fall out of the realm of normal use, but you don't want any latency added. Or let's say they're the major domains, such as Office365.com. You could throw all of those into a whitelist so that you're not adding any latency to the filtering. The idea here is that if it's whitelisted, it's okay. You can pass the traffic right through, and you should be good to go. The same can be said about being able to build blacklists. You can build blacklists to block sites. So let's say if there's new sites popping up that haven't been defined in any categories and you find out people are going to them and you don't want them going to them, for whatever reason. I mean, it could be something as simple as a compliance concern or something to do with productivity or just, employee rules. You can also create blacklists to add additional sites. The DNS filtering systems also give you DNS query analytics. In other words, whenever anyone goes out to a website and looks to, qualify a domain or, visit a website for the first time, there's query analytics around that so that you're able to track what are the most used domains, what domains are requested the most, where your users are spending their time. And I want to also throw in there, we had that question before about DOH, which is DNS over HTTPS. DNS filtering has the ability to filter HTTPS traffic as well as HTTP traffic. So, properly configured, properly set up DNS filtering will address anything in HTTPS as well as the unencrypted HTTP traffic. So it will handle that eventuality.
Okie dokie.
So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is our FORTINET, our sponsor slide. And I believe we're going to run a little video that
we're gonna do more than that. I tell you what, before we do that, leave that on the screen, and Jenny's gonna prepare the video. Oops, she already is. Okay, well, folks, are you ready for some football? And Sadika, we'll come back to your question. I have a question from Sadika. Jenny, are we ready for some football? I sure am. The Seattle Seahawks are rocking. Folks, the sound will come out over your computer speaker. Enjoy FORTINET and football.
We've had a lot of success, won a lot of big games here at Heinz Field, and part of our success has been the fans getting involved. They're investing in our success, and we're paying that back by giving them great connections to the team, to information, to the game itself. Steelers Nation Unite is our official fan loyalty program. It's very simple to sign up. It's a digital program where you qualify for various experiences by earning yards through just normal fan activities.
We utilize technology, and specifically Wi-Fi technology, to allow them to check in to RSVP, to let us know that they're the individual that's sitting in the seat or entering our building. We're interested in understanding our fans better and catering to them as it relates to what they want and what their needs are. That goes anywhere from providing opportunities with sponsorships, as well as picking the songs that go on the scoreboard and interacting with us on social channels.
Our decision to bring Wi-Fi into Heinz Field, that's one that we thought about for a long period of time. We did that thoughtfully. We are a brand that when we go somewhere, we've got to go there with quality and with assurance that it's going to be done very, very well.
The FORTINET firewall solution is protecting all business lines in our organization. That's anywhere from ticketing, marketing, stadium operations, security, and of course football. When we were evaluating Wi-Fi providing solutions, we had a number of competitive bids. The thing that stood out with FORTINET's Wi-Fi, I was blown away by the speed and the capacity of the network, their attention to detail, and the intimate knowledge of the building that they wanted to gain. They were under seats, they were crawling in crawl spaces in the building. They cared about how the system worked for fans and how it worked for the Steelers organization. And that's what set them apart from all the other competitors and all the other technologies out there. The Pittsburgh Steelers are obviously known historically for our legendary defense. The cornerstone of that defense was built on Joe Green. We look at FORTINET to be that cornerstone with us.
Okay, while Frank comes back on, I want to give folks just a little bit of context. Again, you're in the fall quarter of MSP Tech Talk, our ongoing academic series with real content. And the reason we are on the air is because of well-behaved and well-trained community sponsors like FORTINET. They're entering our third year with us, and we have brought them along on the journey. They were a little bit newer than they probably want to admit to the S of SMB. and they have right-sized some offerings as well as their attitude to fit in with the SMB nation, MSPs, and so on. We thank them. And Frank, quickly, when we talk about an NFL franchise and we talk about security, I'll give you a blast from the past. When I carried the bag at a large regional CPA firm back in the 90s, the dot-com boom, our client was in fact the Seattle Seahawks, and they were running Great Plains Dynamics. And this is back when Great Plains actually ran on NetWare before Microsoft acquired them. And I was, of course, the infrastructure guy. Vernon was the Great Plains consultant. And when we would go to this data server room of the Seahawks facility, they had a security guard and a white collar employee watching us, Frank. We were not allowed to be left alone in the data center, and they kept an eye on us, if that makes sense, because the Seahawks, of course, would be an ideal target for hacking in terms of publicity and so on. So, Frank, that's my claim to fame on the NFL.
You know, Harry, I would also keep an eye on you anywhere that you are as well.
So, all right, Frank, let's continue. Tell you what, leave that up for just a second. Let's take the question from Sadika. So the question is, what are the most popular DNS filtering solutions?
Oh boy, well, I mean,
well, FORTINET's a good place to start, but
yeah, well, FORTINET is a good place to start, but you know, there's quite a few of the SMB, UTM appliance type folks out there that do offer that capability. You know, I'm not gonna, you know, throw out all the different names out there, but you know, ones that fit into that realm are the folks like, you know, Sonic Wall and others.
of
you know,
course.
they, you know, will have these capabilities. But what's important to look at is how it's integrated into the platform. Now, you know, FORTINET, for example, uses the idea of a security fabric, which means the, you know, the DNS filtering capability is part of the security stack in the device. It's not something that's kind of, you know, just hobbled together or added on top. This way it works in real time with the rest of the security capabilities. So that's something to be very well aware of.
Absolutely, and again, I don't mind. I don't mind. You know, mentions of who the players are, folks. I would just ask, put FORTINET on your short list. Maybe begin your journey with FORTINET. Kit is suggesting Calyptix. They're a community member. Sadika, we'll come back to your next question in just a moment. So Frank, let's keep this party going, and then I'll queue up a couple questions.
So let's talk about the business case for DNS filtering. This is kind of what you know, people really want to get into, especially our MSPs out there, our solution providers out there. You know, you need to make a business case for why you might want to have DNS filtering and why you might want to offer it to your clients. Right off the bat, you know, it's reported that up to 90% of the malware that's out there on the internet can be blocked using DNS filtering, because 90% of that malware lives on these, you know, less than scrupulous sites is one way to put it. And if you're blocking access to those sites, you're going to, you know, cut down the incidence of malware. Also, DNS filtering can be used as a way to help enforce compliance. You know, a lot of businesses, small businesses even, are bound by compliance regulations. Now, you know, let's take, for example, the small doctor's office. You know, they have to meet the, you know, requirements of HIPAA. And part of that is making sure that no private data is exposed. Now, if you think about how private data does get exposed, on, these smaller networks that might be in a small healthcare facility. It's because either somebody, clicks on something in an email that they shouldn't, or they're visiting a site and it's some type of a drive-by attack that, can intercept data and so on and so forth. So you can help to enforce compliance on those types of sites that are bound by these regulatory requirements with DNS filtering. Also, DNS filtering has the potential to increase productivity. Now, I know most business owners out there aren't looking to, punish their employees by saying, oh, you can't use your work computer for anything personal whatsoever.
Yes, I am. Yes, Jenny. Yes, I am. Okay, Frank.
But there are, cases where you need to, whether it's based upon HR policy or other concerns, that you might have to block access to certain sites. Sites such as, adult content, you might want to block access to that. On the flip side, you might want to help maintain productivity by limiting access to social media sites. And what some organizations do is that they will set up a policy on the DNS filtering that from 9 a.m. to noon, access to social media is blocked, and then
Yep.
and then from noon to 1, during the lunch hour, employees are allowed to access social media sites, and then they go back to blocking it at 1 p.m. So you have the potential to increase productivity that way by keeping people off of sites that can turn into real time sucks. On the flip side, DNS filtering helps you avoid the whole issue of people accusing businesses of censorship. Unlike content filtering, which actually looks at the content, or the typical web filtering, DNS filtering is focusing on the site. So it's focusing on a site based upon a category or a rule, not by looking at what the content is. So you can kind of avoid those thorny issues around censorship. As I said before, DNS filtering can protect users from inappropriate content. Now, case in point might be a small school district. You might have students that are using some of the resources within the school district, and you can make sure that inappropriate content is being blocked by DNS filtering above and beyond what the traditional web filtering does, which means you can, add to blacklists like hacking sites and things like that. So all in all, DNS filtering helps to preserve privacy. By not exposing people to these botnets and these other sites, it helps to protect their privacy. By preventing some of this malware, spyware, ransomware, or these other malicious pieces of code that are delivered by visiting a URL, it blocks those so that it helps to preserve customer privacy and other privacy concerns.
Yes, sir. Let's take a question. Sadiqa asks, is FORTINET, do they also support cloud-based without a device? I believe they do. I can get that answer, Sadiqa. Frank, I don't know if you know. I am not, of course, a product manager at FORTINET.
I believe they do. I believe they offer a virtual appliance that you could stand up in your cloud service provider.
Okay, thank you. And Sadiqa, great question.
I think they support Azure and AWS. Don't hold me to that. I'm kind of going on a vague memory of one of the presentations that I've attended. But the idea there is that most of these vendors out there that create these physical appliances that live at the edge of the network also have bundled their, software intellectual property into a virtual appliance that usually can be deployed at a cloud service provider, so that if you're fully using, abstracted infrastructure delivered via the cloud, infrastructure as a service, you could plug one of these virtual appliances into that to get these features.
And Jenny, if you could make a note, Sadika, I will connect you with a friendly product manager at FORTINET. So totally appreciate the questions. Hey, here's Javier Gutierrez has a question that is right on target with this slide. So I'll read the question, and then Frank, I think you can answer it by reading your lecture slides. So Javier asks, so DNS filtering as opposed to traditional web filtering is a more robust solution since it focuses on sites and not content. You can hit it head on, Frank, or, I think you're going there.
Yeah, I was actually heading there. As my next slide is, what about web filtering? There are many pundits out there that compare web filtering to DNS filtering, and they're two different things. Web filtering, which is based more along the lines of content rules, web filtering requires a large and cumbersome database. In other words, you have these databases of what's bad that has to be loaded onto the appliance, which is updated daily. And these web filtering databases grow quite large. Web filtering also blocks based upon content or a URL from a fully qualified domain name, which means that web filtering still relies on going out to the regular DNS system to resolve a URL, so that if a URL has been hijacked, web filtering might not catch that is a bad URL, and then has to go back to relying on the content filtering end of it, which means it has to inspect all the packets coming in to make sure that whatever is being transmitted fits within the rules of content, which means it has to, in some cases, reassemble all the packets, look at what the information is, and then deliver it onto the endpoint if it can be. So web filtering can add a lot of latency to connections, and that latency is noticed through and through. Even if you have whitelisted sites, they usually still go through the content filtering engine, which means latency is added and it slows down the end user's web experience. Web filtering can be a lot harder to manage because not only are you looking at categories, you're also looking at keywords, you're looking at key phrases, you might be analyzing images. The list goes on of what web and content filtering needs to look at to determine something is appropriate. So web filtering, content filtering is like using a bulldozer to do your gardening when maybe a trowel will do.
Fair enough. All right, let's continue. You are continuing. Welcome to the Department of Redundancy Department.
So let's talk about this from the managed service provider's angle, or the traditional solution provider even. What advantages can DNS filtering bring to their business? Well, for MSPs, there's been a lot of bad news as of late about how MSPs' own networks have been hacked, allowing folks to hackers to break into their networks and do lateral attacks on their customer networks, delivering something along the lines of either ransomware or stealing data. DNS filtering can help protect the MSP networks from those type of infections, because the MSP themselves might be part of the problem, because they might have visited a site which should have been blocked and wound up either revealing some information in transit that they didn't want revealed, or getting one of these drive-by pieces of malware attacks, which winds up putting a keylogger or something onto their management system. So DNS filtering can help the MSP protect their own network, which in turn helps to protect their customer networks. That's how DNS filtering helps to, address these lateral style attacks. It can prevent those compromises by blocking those known bad sites. It can prevent, botnets from getting a hold on a MSP's own network. It can prevent some of this malicious software from coming across. Now, of course, an MSP or a solution provider should be using more than just DNS filtering, but DNS filtering gives you that extra layer of protection. And if you're deploying it out for all of your client networks out there, that means that they cannot become an attack vector to get into the MSP's network to create a lateral attack vector, where the MSP becomes infected and their other clients become infected. So it helps to protect the whole ball of wax. MSPs are able to more easily manage DNS filtering than some of the other security technologies out there, because the MSP can quickly, connect to the appliance, whether it's a virtual appliance out in the cloud or an appliance at the customer's site, and be able to quickly set up default parameters and set up what categories should be blocked, and quickly protect their clients from, attacks that could be related to DNS. And the idea here is that it's easy to set up, easy to deploy, and easy to manage, which should make everybody happy. And what's more, the DNS filtering technology, it usually includes analytics and reporting and logging and elements like that, which would allow a solution provider or MSP to do analytics against the type of traffic that their clients are going out for, which could be used to help them determine, issues such as, bandwidth scaling, or what the top sites are being visited, or even identifying things like, let's say the client is a big user of WebEx or one of the online conferencing systems. They can even look at it from that point of view to see how much traffic is being used in that regard, because they see a lot of activity going to that domain, and they might be able to create policies to help load balance and make those technologies work better. So DNS filtering brings a lot to the table for very little effort.
Well, Frank, and what I would add is I've had occasion the past few months to visit my past life in Alaska. People don't realize, dude, it's only like a 2.5 hour flight from Seattle. People are like, oh, Alaska, wow. And I'm like, no, it's kind of like flying to San Diego. It's actually pretty close. And the point is, in this context, Frank, that Alaska is still what I would call metered bandwidth because of the rural nature, the distant nature of it. So people were like, I was going to stream the Breakfast Club via my Comcast account, and a friend was like, no, I'm near the end of my allocation for the month. And so that would be another management consideration, would be rural and remote areas where, Frank, it's a real issue up in those villages and so on.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could, if you're using DNS filtering, you could to maintain the amount of bandwidth available, or the metered amount, you could block Netflix and block things like that that are very bandwidth intensive, so that you don't use up your quota very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. All right, top reason. Actually, let me take a question from Michael Elias, and Michael says, Harry, Remember ISA and TMG, Threat Management Gateway, they are proxy servers that was necessary for DNS filtering, as I recall. If the firewall component is not a proxy, then you must have an endpoint component that handles the DNS filtering. Is that correct? Does that make sense, Frank? It's in the question. By the way, Frank, you can see these questions over in your control panel by dropping down questions as well.
Oh, okay. That's good. Yes,
But
I
this
can see those
is kind of go back to the old SBS day. I know where Michael's coming from, and ISA and proxy back in the SBS days, yes.
When it comes to these DNS filtering appliances, whether they're virtual appliances or physical appliances, everything is usually built right into the solution to handle that. Usually you don't have to worry about, setting up a separate proxy. You don't have to worry about doing any of that type of heavy lifting that you used to have to do with, your software-based routing that used to live in your server. These UTM devices, universal threat management devices, and these next generation firewalls have pretty decently powerful processors in them. So they're able to, handle the traffic without adding any latency. And I think that's kind of where we were getting to with that question, that, having to set up these additional hoops to go through to be able to use DNS filtering. Usually for most of the vendors out there, it's nothing more than, getting a license and flicking a software switch to enable DNS filtering.
Please continue. Thank you.
All right, let's talk about the top reasons to deploy DNS filtering. And, this goes for both, the solution provider and for their customers. DNS filtering is very effective for blocking botnets because DNS filtering is able to identify and block access to those botnets. So it is able to completely remove them from that internet equation. DNS filtering can also block the subdomains of identified bad actors. Now, a lot of ways that people in the past have tried to get around being identified as a bad actor is that they've created subdomains underneath a legitimate domain.
Yeah.
And by doing that, that allows, folks to think they're, they might be going to IBM.com, but they're actually going to a subdomain under IBM.com, which has been compromised, which is loaded up with, malicious software to be able to do a drive-by attack. DNS filtering actually can block those subdomains. So it takes that type of attack vector out of the equation. DNS filtering can integrate with a lot of the, the anti-malware, anti-intrusion, and the other security elements in your security stack. In most cases, your DNS filtering is part of, an edge appliance, a universal, threat management gateway, or a next generation firewall, or even an application aware firewall. The DNS filtering is built in there, so it integrates with the other security technologies, so it becomes part of the security layer, which gives you that extra level of protection. And DNS filtering gives web access control back to the business. In other words, the business now has control over how the web is accessed because they've deployed DNS filtering. Instead of it being, the wild worldwide west of the web, where anybody can access anything, businesses can determine policies on, who can access what when, giving them control, once again, of their bandwidth and their connectivity and what business systems are being used for. So those are the top reasons to deploy DNS filtering.
All right. I think I heard a dog in the background. Do you have a dog? I thought you
Yes, I have a dog.
And are you, you had some reptile at some point, right?
Yes, I have a gecko, my partner. He sits in a cage behind my desk.
Well, don't ever change and don't give up your day job. So Frank, I think we're starting to bring this in for a landing. Is that fair?
That is very fair. I'm hoping we get a couple of more questions, but I just want to, also, talk about some things to think about. Talking about how internet connectivity has evolved. We've brought forth all these software-defined systems, such as software-defined networking, software-defined wide area networking, SD-WANs, SD-LANs, and networks are becoming much more flat because of that. So when you look at it that way, it becomes much more important to be able to inject security technologies into that connectivity stack. And you have to be keenly aware of how these new technologies ease connectivity, which is a good thing, but also can expose a business to more risk. And that's why technologies such as DNS filtering and your whole security stack are growing in importance. And it's going to become to a point in time where we're going to start seeing, AI-based attacks becoming more frequent. We're going to see AI-powered botnets. We're going to see all these other types of threats rise that we're going to try and take advantage of this easier connectivity that we're providing.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it becomes very, very important to start deploying security technologies, not only for yourself, but also for your clients to counteract these future threats. And, we have other technologies on the horizon, like 5G connectivity, more advanced Wi-Fi solutions. We've got, we're switching over to more and more broadband connections instead of, MPLS. So all of this brings the potential of threats into the typical business environment. So you have to be very proactive here because you don't want to get, bit by the malware bug.
Yep. Hey, Frank, we have a sort of a lengthy commentary from Daryl Roberts. Again, if you can see that, I'll read it, and Frank, you'll probably want to, I'll read it out loud, but you'll probably want to read it to help formulate your answer. Thank you, Daryl. So Daryl says, let me expand my little window. Hang on so I can try and get this all on one page. All right, here we go.
I think he might have just sent it to you because I'm not seeing the question in my chat window.
All right, I'll go ahead and read it. So folks, bear with me. Daryl Roberts asks and says, since we have Windows Active Directory 80 domain, we must configure the clients to use a local DNS server that can direct clients to the 80 domain. To use DNS filtering, I then configure the local DNS server to use the DNS filtering service as its forwarder. When I do that, does the DNS filtering service see the request as it's coming from only my DNS server? That is, it cannot identify the source of the request so that I know where the problem is coming from. If so, is there any solution?
Well, that's making the assumption that you're going to be forwarding your DNS requests through the DNS filtering system. Now, the way that Windows works with DNS and for Active Directory, it's usually dedicated for resolving the intranet, the local network, where your router or your bridge or your gateway is going to be your path outside to the web, to the internet. So, when it comes down to it, it becomes a configuration issue of how you're routing your web traffic. There are several, I've seen them on FORTINET. There are white papers there, technical white papers that talk about that in detail, how to properly set that up. And it really comes down to, how you're, using Active Directory. Are you using Azure as an Active Directory service, so it's out in the cloud, or are you doing it on a, local Windows 2012, R2 server, or how you're building Active Directory out and how you're resolving your internal intranet Active Directory requests. So there's a few different factors to look at there. The best place to probably turn to on that is one of the DNS filtering vendors to discuss your actual implementation that you're using to be able to determine what is the best way to move forward.
Yeah, and like I say, folks, if in the spirit of community, if you could give a first look over to FORTINET as you begin your journey. Last call for questions, folks, last call for questions, and then I can get back to reading about my Seattle Seahawks that once again, we pulled out a victory on Monday night in a game we had no right to win, Frank. we call it Seattle style.
I almost thought you guys were going to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory.
Exactly.
But it went the other way.
I can't believe we're 8-2, and I live here. I should be more of a proponent, but I'm fairly open in my admit. It is fun to watch, though. Boy, howdy, those are some good games. And with that said, it looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. So Frank, thank you very much for your time. Time is, probably the one thing you don't have. And again, just for the audience, I mentioned you're going to be at AWS reInvent after Thanksgiving. Any other places between now and the end of the year that people might bump into you?
I'm going to be at KubeCon in San Diego next week. Looking at the wonderful world of Kubernetes and all the orchestration and security around it. It's a rather large event. Then, of course, AWS reInvent, and I might be at the Gartner event, the Gartner AI event that's in mid-December. I haven't decided on that yet because it's so close to the holidays.
All right, and folks, you can see me next week at Ingram 1 in Denver, Colorado. So come on up and let's have a chit chat. Thank you, Jenny, in the radio control room. Folks, have a great day. Thank you for attending.